Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show for Wednesday, August the 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Joseph Benamy. Thank you so much for joining. Had a little glitch right there at the beginning. I forgot to turn my microphone button on. It's really a cough button, but it's not something that you just hold and then let go. It's an actual toggle switch, so if I'm coughing or sneezing or anything like that, I can toggle it. And of course, you're looking at me now, unless of course you happen to be. Let me just put my keep on. It's just I took it off to scratch my head and forgot to put it back on. Um, in any event, what is going on here? You're all listening to me, but for whatever reason, my picture happens to be, I don't know, kind of frozen there, which is really weird. Um, okay, well, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to go back to the, we're just going to go back to, for the time being, we'll just go back to, let's just see what's going on here for a second, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see this, and then this. And now you can see me. Oh, I'm telling you. And there. Now you can see me. Oh, technical difficulties, I'm telling you. All right, where were we? August the 7th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining in. On tonight's show, we have a number of things that I want to talk about. The first, well, we'll get to the first in a second. I want to talk about Israel and the allegedly pending attack by Iran on Israel in retaliation for some fairly senior assassinations that have occurred over the past couple of weeks. We'll get into that. I do have a couple of questions about how Israel is conducting itself. But first, we're going to get into the anti-immigrant chaos in the UK. I think that that's something that really, it's an ongoing breaking story, really needs some discussion, I think, especially from a conservative point of view. And the here in Canada, if you've been following anything related to the truckers convoy, the Freedom Convoy that occurred a couple of years ago, one of the side or related protests was the Coutts 4. There was a protest at the border crossing in southern Alberta into the United States, and the town of Coutts. So it's the Coutts border crossing. And there were a number of arrests that were made at the time, and 4 individuals were actually charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Now, there were some plea deals that were entered into by a couple of them earlier on this year, but the trial went ahead for 2 more, and they were acquitted. We're going to get into that as well. But before we do any of this, we cannot let the occasion pass without talking about American politics, and in particular, the story I think that is capturing everyone's attention at the particular moment is the fact that Kamala Harris, who is now the official candidate of the Democratic Party for President of the United States after they had a virtual roll call. How they conducted it, I don't know. It's probably not really that important. But she has picked now her running mate, still has to be confirmed, nominated and voted as the running mate at the upcoming Democratic convention. But that'll happen, so you don't have to worry about that at all. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So, gosh, there are just so many things we could talk about with the American in American politics. But on that particular subject, we're not really sure, or I'm not sure why she went ahead and picked Tim Walz. I know that the left wing of the Democratic Party, the wokish wing, if you will, is pretty strong and pretty influential, but are they really not going to vote for the Democratic Party? Are they really not going to vote for Kamala Harris as president? if she doesn't pick the most left-wing, most liberal, wokish, radical candidate for her vice president. And that is, of course, Tim Walz's record as governor of Minnesota. So that's point number one, or question number one. Question number two is, why pick him in the first place, irrespective of his credentials or of his ideological bent, is the fact that Minnesota's not really in play. They're going to win Minnesota, the Democrats. So you need somebody who's going to deliver some votes for you, presumably some organization, some support in other swing states, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, perhaps, and more importantly, in Pennsylvania. So the other name that was being kicked around was Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro happens to be the governor of Minnesota. And by all accounts, well regarded, well respected in Minnesota. So why not choose him? Because you know you're already going to win Minnesota. I said Minnesota, I meant Pennsylvania. Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota. Josh Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania. You know that you're going to win Minnesota. You have to win Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is in play. So why not choose Josh Shapiro? So that's one of the big questions that's out there. And, you know, to be perfectly frank, the response that's floating around, including from many Democrats, is that Josh Shapiro is Jewish. Now, I want to be very careful the way I've just said that, and I want to be very fair to people in the Democratic Party who are not making the calculation that he's Jewish based on his faith. There are some. I don't think that that's a question, and you know, some very prominent Democrats, Van Jones, Geraldo Rivera, have themselves raised the specter of quote-unquote anti-Semitism. So I'm not dismissing anti-Semitism as a reason why certain key people in the Democratic Party would have counseled Kamala Harris not to select Josh Shapiro as her running mate. It's there, but I think that that effect is limited. So I don't want to paint everybody who was opposed to Josh Shapiro based on the fact that he's Jewish. I don't want them to think it's simply anti-Semitism. When I say Jewish, he's a strong supporter of Israel. He's an outspoken supporter of Israel. He has come down fairly hard on the anti-Semitic pro-Hamas demonstrations that were being mounted for a period of time in his own state of Pennsylvania. And so he has that record, and there have to be, and apparently there are members of the Democratic Party in fairly senior, fairly influential positions who counseled Kamala Harris to not select Josh Shapiro for fear that his views on Israel and on the Gaza war might cause some questions to be raised during the campaign. And this is an issue that I think the Democrats want to run away from as fast as possible, because the United States is still solidly pro-Israel, solidly pro-Jewish, and including the Democratic Party. There's a larger number of people in the Democratic Party who I think it's fair to characterize them as being anti-Israel, okay? But still, the majority of members of the Democratic Party are pro-Israel, as would be the majority of the Democratic caucus in Washington, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So this is a problem that they don't want to arise during the campaign, and for that reason, she picked Tim Walz. Okay, so that's on the Democratic side of things. On the Republican side of things, you know, a lot of people are talking about the fact that Kamala Harris is pulled even in national polls with Donald Trump, and she's faring much better than Joe Biden was. Obviously, I think anybody who's simply alive would fare better than Joe Biden. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Joe Biden. I mean, the reality is that Joe Biden is not well physically and cognitively. He's not a healthy man. And so I think he made the right decision for both himself, his family, and for the country to finally decide not to run. As I said before, I'm astonished that senior members of the Democratic Party didn't ensure that this happened earlier on, but it is what it is. This is the situation that we're dealing with right now in the United States. Yeah, I don't remember where I was going with this. I want to say, the Republican Party. So Kamala Harris has pulled even with Donald Trump in some of these polls, or is faring better than Joe Biden was. I don't think there's any surprise there. And you may still see, as we head into the Democratic National Convention, you may still see an even bigger bump. But Republicans shouldn't be panicking for a couple of reasons. I think that this choice of Tim Walz, for a number of reasons, is going to hurt Kamala Harris, number one. Number two, I think Kamala Harris is going to hurt Kamala Harris as people become more and more aware of her as the candidate for the Democratic Party for president. I think that she's going to hurt herself, her record, her style is going to hurt her. And I think the same thing with Tim Walz. Tim Walz is a better campaigner. He's better spoken, more articulate, but he's, to the degree that he's a policy wonk, he's a left-wing, far left policy wonk. And I think that's going to hurt him, in addition to other things that are already breaking with respect to his claims on military service, etc. So I don't want to get into that tonight because I don't have all of the facts, and I'd rather not just deal in innuendo. The other thing that nobody should be panicking on the Republican side, because Republican support is generally underestimated. The Republicans and Donald Trump in particular generally underperform in opinion polls and overperform at the ballot box. So I think that if that trend holds, I think it's fair to say that we're headed for a Donald Trump second term in office. One other thing I want to mention with respect to the race in the United States, and that is J.D. Vance, the Republican Donald Trump's running mate, his selection as vice president, or for vice president. I like him. I've spent now a couple of days, listening to him do press conferences, his speeches, etc. He's not perfect. Nobody is, but I have to tell you, I like him. I like his style. I like he's clear cut, easy to understand, not confusing or any of that stuff when it comes to answering questions. And he's quite happy taking questions from the media. And so far, Kamala Harris has not been. So I can't wait to see J.D. Vance going up against Tim Walz in a vice presidential debate. Hopefully we'll get to see that. But I'm impressed with him, I have to tell you. I generally like his politics, his policy as well. Of course, he's the running mate, so he's not going to form policy. But still, I have to tell you, I like him. And if you don't know anything about J.D. Vance, look him up on the internet. He has a very compelling life story, When he talks about the American dream, lots of people running for office talk about the American dream. It's a bit of a cliche, but this man really is living the American dream, quite literally. So I think that he brings a whole lot to the table, and I'm excited, as I said, to see what else he has to bring as we move forward. Okay, we're going to take our first break for the evening, so stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. And we are back, and I remembered to turn my microphone switch on this time. And the camera seems to be working fine, so we're off to the races. You're tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show if you're just tuning in. Thanks for joining. It is August the 7th, Wednesday, August the 7th, 2024. Okay, so we spent some time talking in the first segment of the show of the situation in the United States, and we could spend hours talking about the situation in the United States because it's that interesting and it's that consequential. But the world is full of news, and top of the news story chart, really on the international scene, has to be the current situation in the Middle East. Now, as you know, the Israelis were involved in a couple of high-profile attacks that led to the death of a senior member of Hamas in Gaza, a senior member of Hezbollah. In fact, is the head of the military wing of Hezbollah in Lebanon in an attack in Beirut, and Israel has confirmed that they were involved in these attacks. There was nothing hidden about them. And then shortly after the attack in Beirut that killed Fouad Shukra was an attack in Tehran that killed the head of Hamas. They're going to say the head of the political wing of Hamas, and I don't really care for that characterization. He was essentially the head of Hamas, and Ismail Haniyeh. Okay, so Haniyeh is dead. Now, the Israelis have not taken responsibility for that particular attack, but it's widely believed that they were involved. I don't know whether they were or not. I don't have any inside information on it, but it's widely believed that they were involved. The Iranian government, no surprise here, okay, it has threatened revenge. They have promised that they're going to exact some kind of punishment against Israel, which of course means organizing some sort of an attack on the Jewish state. And not only no surprise, but all I could think of here is, here we go again. Iran continues to do this, and to attack Israel. And really the subject I think of what I want to talk about for a few minutes here tonight is whether or not the Israeli government, whether or not it's time for the Israeli government to really reevaluate how it's been managing this conflict with Iran that has been going on now for many years. Okay, low level, low grade, for sure. But this is a war that's been going on between Israel in particular and Iran, but also between the United States and Iran and other Western countries in Iran, at a lower grade perhaps, because the countries are separated from Iran by a large distance, and the animus that the Iranian regime has for, let's say, the Americans or the British or the French or whatever, for the West, as real as it is, I don't think it reaches quite the depth, quite the profundity, if you will, of the animus that they hold for Jews and the Jewish state. So as I said, this has been going back. Hezbollah's first major attack occurred all the way back in 1983 when they bombed the U.S. barracks, Marine Corps barracks just outside of Beirut, and also a French army barracks just outside of Beirut. They killed more than 200 U.S. Marines in that particular attack. And the Americans were there, as were the French, to provide peacekeeping and stability as part of an agreement for Israel to withdraw or to enter into a ceasefire, because they were fighting a war at the time against the PLO, which was ensconced in southern Lebanon in a way that's similar to what Hezbollah is doing now. I think that was a terrible mistake, but look, 1983, we're going 41 years ago, so let's not waste our time arguing about the past. The question now is, at what point in time does the Israeli government say, enough, we're going to take on Iran directly because this is a war between us and Iran, even though the Iranians are using proxy armies. But they've never made a secret of their intent. And so how do you stop this from happening? Well, I sympathize with the Israeli government on two levels. The first is nobody wants to have an all-out war. Nobody wants to have an all-out war, including, I would say, probably the Iranians. That would be bad, I think, on a certain level, would be bad for everybody. The second reason that I sympathize with Israel is because even if the government of Israel wants to go ahead and just fight it out to the bitter conclusion, and I have no doubt that Israel would win that war, okay? But even if they wanted to, they have been under extraordinary pressure from the international community not to retaliate. And this, I have to tell you, quite frankly, I don't just find it astonishing. I find it deeply offensive. As a Jew, I find it very offensive that anyone would say to me and to my people, listen, we don't want to see a war in the area, so you just accept the fact that, you know, every now and then they're going to attack you, and there's going to be bloodshed, and Israelis are going to die, etc. You can have a moderate retaliation, but you know, what's the word of the week and of the month and of the year? De-escalate. We want to prevent escalation. We want to de-escalate the situation. It's become a bit of a cliche, a bit of a farce when you think about it, because the only people really who've been interested in de-escalating are the Israelis. Nobody's restraining Iran, at least not so far. So let's. It's time, I think, for the Israeli government to really reassess the way it's handling this whole situation strategically. You know, stop fighting Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and Islamic Jihad and et cetera, and start focusing on the center of all of this, the nexus, if you will, the head of the octopus. Think of Iran as an octopus. You have the head, which is the current regime in Iran, and then you have all of these tentacles spread around, not just in the Middle East, but around the world. The way that you deal with the tentacles is not by cutting them off. And, you know, as I'm using that metaphor, I start to think to myself, I'm not sure whether or not an octopus is one of the creatures that actually grows back limbs. There are creatures that will grow a limb back once it's been amputated. So, you know, if an octopus is like that, then you're going to cut the limb off and it's eventually going to grow back. So you're never getting ahead of yourself. If you want to win the war, if you want to end the bloodshed, and this is the key, this isn't just about Israeli security, this is about ending the bloodshed once and for all by removing the organization that is encouraging and funding and organizing the violence directed against Israel and against Jews around the world. Kill the octopus. Take the head off. Once you take the head off, the limbs go kind of limp. They don't grow back. The head doesn't grow back. The limbs may. And I have to fact check, by the way, that I don't know whether that's the case with an octopus, but you get the point that I'm making. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, that's the way you deal with an Iran. And I think it's time for the Israelis. They certainly have demonstrated their capability in this area, I think. And so, yeah, it's time for the Israelis to say, this stops now, or we will target the heads of Iran. Because the problem is not the head of Hamas, and the problem is not Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. The problem is the head of Iran the Ayatollahs and the extremists within that regime. And I know what I'm saying sounds radical, and people are going to go, "Oh, you say you're a radical, you're insensitive, etc." But ultimately, this is going to save lives. If the Israeli government did this, it would save lives. It would save Israeli lives, Jewish lives around the world. It would save Palestinian lives. End the war. Send a message to Iran if you want, and say to Iran, not "we will exact a heavy price," etc. No. Don't beat around the bush. Straight out, tell them straight out. If this continues, you are going to be targeted. We are going to take you out. And I think the world would be a better place for it, to be perfectly honest with you. I, for one, would not if I had been alive at the time. And I learned that an air raid by the British or the Americans on Berlin had been to kill Hitler and half of his particular entourage. I don't think that I would have lost a lot of sleep over that. I don't think I would have felt too sorry. And something like that may have had a beneficial effect on the war. It's entirely possible that you could have seen that the war would have ended much sooner, with much less destruction and much less loss of life because of it. So, send the same message to the leaders of Iran. This is not a war with the people of Iran. The people of Iran generally are pro-Western, and they're not in favor, of their regime. Take the regime out. Now, granted, that's easy for me to say. I'm sitting here in Ottawa, but still, I think that that's the right thing to do. Certainly, at some point in time, there has to be a better strategy. I would even go so far as to say at some point in time, there has to be a strategy, period. I don't perceive a strategy here. I perceive a lot of tactical prowess, but I don't perceive a long-term strategy. Okay. Time for our second break, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Do not go away. And we are back. Thanks for sticking with us, or sticking with me, I guess I should say. Um, you're tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show for August the 7th, Wednesday, August the 7th, 2024. I am your host, Joseph Benamy. Sorry, I was just looking at a note posted here on the wall behind my cameras, and it just threw me for a little bit of, I got a little confused. That was my Joe Biden moment for the evening. Okay. A couple of years ago, if you have been following things in Canada, there was a protest. We call it the Freedom Convoy, the trucker protest, whatever you want to call it, where a whole convoy, tens of thousands of people descended on Canada's national capital, primarily as trucker convoyers, part of a convoy of truckers, to protest a number of issues surrounding COVID restrictions at the time. And that protest, the city of Ottawa was paralyzed largely in the downtown area, a lot of inconvenience. I don't want to get into all of the details about it. Some of it has been exaggerated. Actually, a lot of it has been exaggerated, etc. Eventually, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act, and we could do a show on that, by the way, because there have been some legal ramifications of that here in Canada as well. But we're not going to get into that tonight. There were a number of protests that were going on in other locations in Canada at border crossings that were related to the demonstration, the main demonstration in Ottawa. One of these side protests, or satellite protests, I guess we could call them, was in the town of Coutts, Alberta, which is on the border between Alberta and the United States, I believe Montana, at that border crossing point. So there was a smaller trucker blockade of that border crossing that was related to the larger demonstration that was occurring in Ottawa at the same time. And there were some other demonstrations at other border crossings between Canada and the United States as well. But the Coutts one was made infamous, if you will, by the fact that there were a number of arrests that were made, and there were 4 individuals that were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, specifically, I should say, conspiracy to commit murder of certain RCMP officers. So these became known as the Coutts 4. So they've been on trial off and on, or they were incarcerated since their arrest, and their trial recently concluded. Now, sorry, let me back up a little bit. Earlier this year, 2 of the 4 individuals actually reached some plea deals with the Crown, and so they weren't part of the trial. There were only 2 individuals who were part of the trial. So, a mixed result from the trial. I think it's important to put all of this into context because a lot of people have been celebrating the fact that the 2 individuals that were left, Mr. Carbert and Mr. Olenek, were acquitted. It's true that they were acquitted. The jury came back with an acquittal on this past Friday afternoon. But they were only acquitted of the conspiracy to commit murder. Okay, what they were not acquitted of, in fact, they were found guilty of weapons charges. And there were a number of weapons charges, so it really doesn't matter whether or not, it doesn't matter what the weapons charges were. What matters is that there were weapons charges, and they were found guilty of those. So it's a bit of a mixed result. So these guys are probably going to go to jail. The sentencing is set for August the 12th, which is early next week, and we'll see what the outcome is. But my prediction is that they're going to go to jail. They won't go to jail on the conspiracy to commit murder charges, but they will go to jail, I expect, on the weapons charges. So there are a couple of lessons to learn from this. I'm not breaking out the champagne bottles. I'm not even going to say I'm bringing out the champagne bottles yet. I don't think that it's worth celebrating. I think that there were a number of issues that this trial raised with respect to warrants and with respect to search and seizure of private property and searching private property, seizing private property, etc. There are a number of items here that I think that are problematic in the long run, and it's nice to say that okay, they were found not guilty of conspiring to commit murder, but all the same, I mean that's a much harder charge to prove in the first place, and as I say, they're still going to go to jail. So I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding the adulation, the celebratory atmosphere surrounding this really mixed verdict. And I don't think it's helpful. And this is a good example, I think, of the misinformation, in this case, misinformation that's very positive, that is circulating on the internet, on social media, and in small c conservative circles. And this troubles me a great deal. As I say, it's positive news, but it's not accurate positive news. It's more often than not, when you hear me complaining about what's going on and what's circulating that's not accurate on social media, insofar as it involves conservatives, or it's riling up or it's leading conservative opinion in one way or another, it's encouraging conservatives to believe a particular thing, and I say that it's not accurate. Usually it's negative. In other words, usually somebody will be posting stuff that's not accurate, that it will induce and foment unrest, unhappiness, anger, even frustration within conservative circles. In this case, it's kind of the opposite. The effect is the same, in that it's inducing an air of celebration that we succeeded, we won. In truth, I don't think we really won anything on this particular case. I really don't. And I think that it's really too bad that conservatives are not taking a step back and asking, okay, yeah, it's fine. We're happy that at least this aspect of the charges were that they were found not guilty of. Take the good news for what it's worth, but I'm not sure how much it's worth, I guess, is the point I'm making. And I still think that there's a lot of work to do. Look, here's the thing. I actually think that what we have to start doing within the conservative movement is we have to start being a little bit more proactive, and not proactive, not just focusing on what the government is doing or not doing. There's a little bit too much, I think, attention within conservative circles focused on what our opponents are doing, and we're not really doing a good job, I think, of articulating what it is that we believe and promoting those beliefs, promoting those values in a positive, constructive, intelligent, clear, concise way. And I think that there's a real need for that, not just here in Canada, but within the conservative movement internationally. Part of the problem is that a lot of people who call themselves conservatives, and they may be conservatives deep down in their attitudes, etc., but they really don't understand what that means. And it's really hard to define what it means to be conservative, in fairness, okay? Because conservatism really isn't a system, a political system, or an ideology or a doctrine. It's in fact, it's the opposite of these things. It's really more of an attitude, an approach to doing things, an approach to how we govern, how we conduct our lives. So it's really hard to define. But still, I think that it can be defined. We can draw out some of these principles. We can say, why as conservatives we supported the Coutts 4, and why we're disappointed ultimately with the ruling, with the verdicts that were passed down last Friday. Why were we upset that they were charged in the first place? Why are we upset with the fact that we still have this trial going on in Ottawa of Chris Barber and Tamara Lich? Why? What is it about those things that contradict what we believe as conservatives, that go against our values? What are the values? And it may be very simple. It may be very simple. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to overcomplicate what I'm saying, but this is something that I think really needs to be done. And here's the bottom line: there are a group of us that want to do something about this, and we are planning on doing something about it. So, stay tuned. If you haven't gone to the website, josephbenamy.com is my personal website, where you can get all of these podcasts in an archive. And you should go there and you should sign up for email updates, because we're going to be passing on more information on this particular topic. It's congratulations to Mr. Carbert and Olenek. Great. We're happy that they had this partial victory. But we're still sad that it was only a partial victory, and we still have a lot of work to do, obviously, in this country. I'm just looking at the time. We're going to go for our final break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. So, ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us. And we are back. You are tuned into the Joseph Banamy Show for Wednesday, August the 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Joseph Banamy. Thank you so much for staying with us, or thank you for joining us if you are just joining. Okay, home stretch. Got the order of the things I wanted to talk about just a little mixed up. I wanted to talk about the Coutts 4 in the last segment of the show, but I got that mixed up. So that was my second Joe Biden moment of the evening. Be that as it may, we still have an important topic to talk about, and maybe it's better that we're talking about this in the final segment, because I have some very important and I think some very strong words to say on this subject. And what I want to talk about very briefly is the violence, the anti-immigrant violence that is occurring in the United Kingdom at this particular point in time. Now, a little bit of background. I don't want to get into the whole immigration policy in England issue. That's an issue that I'm sympathetic to. I've spoken about it here in Canada, and what we're doing in Canada and our immigration policy, and the problems that can ensue from the kind of policies that we're pursuing here in Canada. And by the way, as bad as things may be in the UK with a high level of immigration, it doesn't come, for those of you who live in Canada, our immigration policy, the number of people that we bring into this country far exceeds, both in strict numbers, in raw numbers, and as a proportion of the population, far exceeds what's going on in Great Britain. So I understand the problem, and I understand the potential issues surrounding the high levels of immigration with respect to a fracturing, if you will, of the cultural consensus that I think is very important to maintaining not just law and order, but also a sense of identity. And there are many, many ramifications of this. This is not the time, though, to get into that. I've spoken about it before. I'll speak about it again. But tonight, I want to talk about this particular incident that happened last week, where a teenager, an older teenager, attacked a number of children who were attending a Taylor Swift dance party. Girls, young girls. And he attacked them with a knife, and a number of them were stabbed, and 3 died. The internet immediately exploded with this theory that this individual was, in fact, an immigrant and that had entered the country illegally. That was not true. That was false. And the police took the extraordinary step when people started to get riled up over this, of releasing information on this person who is still a minor in law, including his name, in order to try to get people to understand, listen, this is a horrific attack. This was a terrible crime, but this is not an immigration issue. This was not an immigrant, legal or illegal, who perpetrated this particular act of violence. It seems, ladies and gentlemen, that my friends in the UK didn't care. Too many didn't care. And I use the term friends, and maybe I shouldn't be using those terms, because there is an element. There are 2 problems here. The first is misinformation. We have, as somebody who's been in the culture wars, in the trenches of the culture wars and the political fights, etc., for decades now, there are many things that we have to fight about. But when we spend time fighting about things which aren't actually real, we're taking our attention away from those issues that are real. And so it's critically important that we be careful to ensure that whatever energy we're expending, whether it's organizing against something or protesting something or organizing in favor of something, that the end objective, that the motivating factor behind this particular endeavor or initiative that we're undertaking is actually real. It's actually real, and that the plans that we're trying to implement are going to actually be effective. And unfortunately, there are too many people who are in positions of influence within the right wing of the political cultural spectrum, if you will, that are misinformed. And there are some people who are purposely misinforming in order to foment unrest and instability. And by the way, we were talking earlier tonight's show about the Iranian government. Well, the Iranian government and the Chinese government and the Russian government are masters at sowing the seeds of disinformation and social unrest. And there were too many people, I regret to say, on the conservative side of things, my friends, who are, how do I put it delicately, gullible. And they're too quick to assume that what they're seeing on the internet, what they've read, what the tweets, whether it's TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, they're too quick to assume that the so-called information that's being conveyed through these media are in fact accurate. And I sympathize. I really do. I sympathize because so much of it is believable, honestly, when you think about it, that our woke governments and our woke institutions, it's not a stretch for us to believe that some of the things that they're being accused of are actually true. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's really important, particularly for those of us who pride ourselves on being conservatives, on being sensible and reasonable, on being somewhat restrained in our passions and our emotions, and having some control over our reactions. I mean, that is so important, so central to what it means to be a conservative. And so when we basically throw that out and say, well, we have to be more aggressive, etc., that's just too simple. And we see it playing out now in the UK, where we see mobs, and not all of these mobs, by the way, are is it fair to say that they're right-wing mobs? Hooligans are hooligans are hooligans. Back in the day when hooliganism was a big deal in soccer matches in the UK, and where UK teams were actually being banned from playing in continental European matches because their fans would come over and they had horrendous riots where dozens of people were not just injured, but dozens of people would be killed. This was not a left-wing, right-wing thing. Hooliganism, ladies and gentlemen, is a phenomenon of itself. Okay? It's not something that's necessarily politically motivated. The spark may be political. It may be disinformation, and in this case, it largely has been. But look, the way you deal with immigration problems and policies is through the political system. You have to mobilize. If you want to protest, if you believe in civil disobedience is not burning down police cars. It's not rioting in the streets. It's not attacking immigrants, okay? Civil disobedience is picketing and protesting, and look, even blocking, as they did here in Ottawa with the Freedom Convoy, where nobody got hurt, but there was a conscious effort to disrupt and interfere with the lives of people here. And there's no sense in complaining about it and saying, oh, they were terrible people because they interfered with our day-to-day activities. That's the whole purpose of a protest. We're all sorry when people get interfered with, okay, and they maybe feel a little intimidated, although I don't think they had any reason to feel intimidated with what was going on here in Canada. But still, that's the whole purpose. So you want to block entrances to Parliament buildings, get several thousand people. Peaceful protest, ladies and gentlemen. Peaceful protest. That's the way you do it, not this rioting. This has to stop. It's, for whatever it's worth, I personally condemn this. This is giving my people as conservatives a bad name. This gives the right wing a bad name. Okay, not because it is right wing and not because it's conservative, but because there are too many people out there, and not just lefties who are trying to paint us as bad people, but our own supporters who are portraying themselves as conservatives while they take on this kind of hooligan behavior. It's not right. It has to stop. And I'm urging people in the UK to stop now. And for people here in North America, I urge you, do not emulate what they're doing, ladies and gentlemen. It's wrong. It's fundamentally unconservative. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you taking the time to join in tonight. As always, check out the website, www.josephbenamy.com, all one word without the hyphen. While you're there, sign up for our free email updates, and we will catch you next week. In the meantime, God bless. Take care of yourself, stay safe, and whatever you do, do not drink the Kool-Aid.